Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans. I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 24 years. I was introduced to this practice during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a raging panic disorder, which had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to leave the house. I was on disability. Happened to get paired up with a psychologist who, even back in 1998, was already several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me these tools and techniques as a way of working with what I was going through. I was not thrilled with his suggestion. I couldn't work, I couldn't go out, I couldn't do anything. And here's this guy saying, well, let's watch the breathing for a while and see what happens. Okay. He didn't give me anything else at first. I'm sitting at home panicking all day anyway. I figured I'll give this thing a shot just long enough so I can go back to him and honestly say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? 24 years later, never had that talk with him. Still practice every day. Now I'm teaching. It's changed my life. Perhaps saved my life. A few times, maybe. So, here we are. Thanks for being with me. I like to give this ongoing series of talks that I call calming anxiety by living mindfully, sharing some of the tools and techniques that were shown to me as well as ones that I've found on my own, have shared with others, as a way of helping others in the way that I've been helped and continue to be helped. So today I'll be offering another one in the long list that I, to this day, still use myself sometimes. And today, I'll be offering one that I come to in some of the darkest times. And hopefully it will resonate with some of you as well. Okay? Let's jump in. I like to begin my sitting by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head. As a nice cue to sit up straight, without adding any extra tension to do so. If we are experiencing some tension right now, that is fine. There's no need to interfere with it. No need to try to get rid of it. That really just adds tension to whatever tension might already be here. That doesn't help. So I find that if I'm experiencing some tension, mentally, physically, emotionally, I can simply notice that it's here. I may notice what it's like. But I don't need to interfere. And I also like to notice what is in contact with the floor, chair, cushion. So there's a feeling of grounding. Something is supporting me, holding me up. And I can allow it to do so. So let's take a moment to notice the support beneath us and the suspension from the ceiling. And whatever else happens to be in between the two for us right now. However it is. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And you may find when you bring your attention to your breathing, you begin to control or shape your breathing. Perhaps on purpose, perhaps not so much. We can control and shape the breathing, but we do not have to. Our bodies know how to breathe and can take care of it. So much in the way that we might simply observe whatever tension might be here right now, if there is any. We can also observe the breathing, however it is. There are no requirements for it. Just that we see it. Now, one of the things that I talk about a lot, focus on a lot, in my teaching, in my practice, is working on expanding the comfort zone. As I mentioned in some of my other talks, our comfort zone is not a static thing. If it's not expanding, in my experience, it's shrinking. And it was by not working with my own comfort zone skillfully that I ended up agoraphobic, housebound, because of panic disorder. One of the ways we may skillfully work with the comfort zone is using a technique that in psychology is sometimes called the pendulum technique, where we approach something that is uncomfortable, perhaps scary, and then step back away from it. And then move towards it again when we feel ready. And step away again. This may be something we do physically. Maybe something we do physically, or it could be something we're doing in the mind. Now, for me, when working with anxiety, panic, I found this interesting sort of conundrum. what exactly am I trying to approach here? Suddenly, when opening to the concept of anxiety, when there was this willingness to approach this thing called anxiety or fear, well, what exactly was it? I mean, there are thoughts and storylines about it. There are certainly various physical sensations. But are the thoughts the fear, anxiety? Are the physical sensations the fear, the anxiety? I mean, some of these thoughts, sensations, some of these come up in other contexts too. Anger, joy, surprise. So I could anchor on the breathing and observe a thought as it came up. A storyline I'd start writing as I ran away with the thought, or the thought ran away with me. Or I could direct my attention more physically and notice the bodily sensations. But the thoughts aren't fear, aren't anxiety. They're thoughts. Storylines aren't fear and anxiety. They're storylines, another kind of thinking. Physical sensations. Not fear, not anxiety, they're physical sensations. So I found that when I was willing to approach anxiety or fear, I didn't even really know what it was I was approaching. Apart from these components that I was collectively grouping together and labeling fear, anxiety. And I realized that thing that I was labeling fear or anxiety was really, if I had to make an analogy in the physical world, was a cloud. Fear is a cloud. It was this collection of thoughts, feelings, sensations that I was grouping together. It looked very solid from the outside. There it is. Anxiety, fear. Yep, there it is. This big object, this big thing. But now that I was willing to approach it, to touch it, well, like any cloud, my hand just went right through it. There's nothing actually there. As solid as it looks from the outside, there's nothing to touch, much less hold, from the inside. It's vapor. It's not that it's not there. What I found was it's just not there in the way we think it's there. But I couldn't see that until I was willing to find out what it was really like. Instead of buying into my assumption of what it must be like. I invite you to take a component or two of this overall experience that you may label fear or anxiety. And perhaps try the pendulum technique with it. Stay anchored on the breathing. And whether it's a thought, a feeling, sensation, perhaps approach it. Even just for a moment or two. Knowing that we can withdraw at any time. And then try again, whenever we like. And perhaps you're not ready to try to approach any of these components yet, in which case we may just stay with the breathing. And perhaps open to the possibility that at some point we may be willing to try to approach some of these things. You may, in time, as I have, become comfortable enough with the discomfort to go deeply enough into this cloud to find that you simply come out the other side before you ever find any kind of solid core. And life keeps showing me again and again that it's not just fear, it's not just anxiety. That's this cloud. Everything. Everything ends up being like a cloud. Just a way that we think of collections of things, of experiences. That when we really open to them, when we really examine them, when we really observe them, They're all things that we can simply move right through. And that can move right through us. If we allow it. So as you go through your day, you might notice what comes up, what thoughts come up, what feelings come up, what sensations come up, and how we're bundling them together in different combinations and saying, okay, that's that, and that's that, and that's that. Are they? Or are they just components that we're dividing up and putting together in different categories? Simply because that's what we've always done. Because even that habit in itself is kind of a cloud, isn't it? I invite you to notice where this might come up throughout your day. And just see it. And perhaps in time, see through it. Thank you, everyone. I'll be hanging on for a few minutes if people would like to share any questions or observations in the chat. Anna, what is mindfulness? Wow, that's a big question and a great question. Colloquially, these days, when people talk about mindfulness, they often mean awareness, bringing an awareness to our present experience, what you might call a non-judgmental awareness or a choiceless awareness, such that we are seeing what is coming up. Kind of like I was talking about with this fear cloud or anxiety cloud, rather than getting caught up in our storylines about it and our assumptions about it, our memories about it, our judgments about it, all this stuff that we layer on top of it, we're simply noticing it as it is so that we can see what it's really like, which usually ends up being not as bad as what we think it's going to be like. But it also gives us the opportunity to gain some familiarity with what it actually is like. Because as humans, we don't like uncertainty. Where there's uncertainty, there could be danger. All right? This is hardwired into us from our tribal days. So what happens is when there's something unpleasant or something we fear might be unpleasant, we avoid it. And therefore never become familiar with it. And if we don't become familiar with it, that uncertainty remains. And so we never break that cycle of uncertainty and unfamiliarity and fear that just keeps going. If we can come to things as they actually are, we gain some actual familiarity. Even if they're not comfortable, even if they're still uncomfortable, we've at least gained some legitimate familiarity with them such that the uncertainty that we had around them can begin to dissipate. And that brings me to what the more traditional definition of mindfulness is. Much of what I teach and study comes from Theravada Buddhism, which are the teachings of the historical Buddha as best we know them, since they've been passed down 2,500 years ago across so many cultures and so forth. When the Buddha talked about mindfulness, he was not talking about awareness. He talked about awareness, but that was separate from mindfulness. What the Buddha taught was, how do we alleviate our suffering? And what I was just describing is a form of that. When we continue to remain unfamiliar with things that might be uncomfortable out of fear, we continue to be uncertain and unfamiliar with them and continue to have often irrational fears about them. This is suffering. This is suffering. And when the Buddha talked about mindfulness, mindfulness is really a function of memory. It is remembering what we have done in the past that has eased our suffering rather than increased our suffering. So in this case, we may mindfully remember a time in the past when we have approached something uncomfortable, like thoughts or sensations, perhaps about anxiety or fear or panic. When we have approached those without our storylines, just to see exactly as they are. And then, as I said, in my experience, I go into that cloud of anxiety now and I find I just come out the other side before I find anything solid to latch onto. Like, wow, there's really not anything here except what I've created. And I may still be experiencing uncomfortable sensations or thoughts or feelings, but now I am allowing them to simply be the processes that they are. Which means not only am I not adding suffering on top of the discomfort, but they also have a chance to fully work themselves out without my interference and ironically go away faster. So I hope that gives some kind of an overview of mindfulness. Jennifer says, learning to be fully present in the moment, being aware of but not bewildered by our thoughts. And I'll even add to that and say, we could be bewildered by our thoughts, but we notice that. Okay? We notice that. Oh, I'm bewildered right now. Okay. There's this old parable I remember reading a number of years ago that I've come back to again and again in some of my more bewildered moments. And it's helped me a lot, and I'll share it here, which is the student goes to the master and says, "Master, I'm so confused." And the master claps his hands and says, "Wonderful." And the student says, "What's wonderful? I just told you I'm confused." And the master says, "What better state is there from which to gain clarity than confusion?" So in times when I'm feeling confused or bewildered, okay, I notice that, and let's see where it goes. Let's let it be bewilderment. Let's let it be confusion. It's a process. It has to lead somewhere. So let's see where it goes. Yeah, Michelle, that's a great point. When the cloud envelops you, it fogs out everything else. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? When you look at fog from the outside, it looks like this thing you can't see through. And then you walk into it and suddenly you're in it and you can see around yourself, but not very far necessarily, depending on how thick it is. And it does block out what's outside of it. So it can be very challenging when we're on the inside, right? And what I have found, when I talk about pain or discomfort versus suffering, it may be uncomfortable, or what I would sometimes call painful. In this case, I'd call it uncomfortable, to be inside the cloud. Because we might feel a little lost, a little bewildered, a little confused when we can't see to the outside. And in that case, I would say that clinging to the need to be able to see the outside, the other side of the cloud, could be a suffering line of thinking. Because are we actually unsafe inside the cloud? We may be uncomfortable, but are we unsafe? When I found myself inside the cloud and I'm looking around, it's like, okay, this is a little disconcerting, to say the least. I want to be able to see the outside. Am I okay? Well, it seemed to be okay. Is the breath still here? Breath is still here. Can I still observe? I can still observe. Is it comfortable? No, not necessarily. Is it unsafe? No, not necessarily. So that becomes part of the process, is that willingness to be inside. Because is it actually a problem, or are we making it a problem? Because if there's nothing solid there, how do you know what is inside? Yeah, Marcy, that's uncomfortable already with pain, trying to move through it. That's really the trick a lot of the time, is we want to fix so badly, so quickly. There's that willingness again. Can we train ourselves in the willingness to experience pain and discomfort? It's not intuitive, and not only is it not intuitive, it's not really the way most of us were raised. We were largely raised to try to eradicate pain as quickly as possible, even if that meant we were doing things that maybe weren't skillful or sustainable in the process, like I did, distracting myself and denying my anxieties for so long that they erupted into panic disorder and agoraphobia. If I had simply been willing in the early days of my trauma to open to the various sensations and feelings and thoughts, I probably wouldn't be here talking about this stuff right now, because I probably would have worked through it in a couple of months and not caused myself, years of suffering. So, again, it comes back to that willingness to experience discomfort or pain when we don't really have an option whether it's going to be here or not. Our option is, how are we going to handle it? Skillfully or unskillfully, in a sustainable way or not so much. Yeah, Farnaz, we want to run away from the fears, and that's normal. That's normal. This is a process. This is gradual. And for some of us, it's the first time in our lives we're trying to do this. It's a brand new, not even just a new habit, a whole new way of thinking. The really hard parts of getting started sometimes is we have to get over that initial hump of dealing with discomfort, fear, pain in a skillful way for the first time. And when we're doing that, that in itself is scary and uncomfortable. So it just kind of layers on top of the scariness and discomfort that we're already trying to deal with in the first place. It's very challenging to get that first foothold. And that's why we want to take our time. Use techniques like the pendulum technique, where we move towards it a little bit, move away a little bit, move towards it a little bit, move away a little bit. We're building a new skill here. Like when you're trying to learn a musical instrument for the first time, you have no skills, right? And you have, well, how do you even begin if you don't even have a framework established within which to develop your skill? So there's a lot of trial and error. And the important thing is to experiment. And it's in the experimentation and in continual, persistent, consistent experimentation that we build our skill. And that's a lot of what I'm offering here in these sessions are different things to try, different experiments, and see what resonates. And we don't even notice that our skill is sharpening until all of a sudden something breaks through at some point. Like, oh, how'd that happen? It's cause and effect. Keep placing the causes and conditions in place and seeing what the effects are. That's all I've ever done. That's the whole practice. Yeah, Michelle, worrying about living our lives without how it'll affect other people. I was giving a talk a few days ago. There's an American monk that I study and quote quite a lot, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, and he gives this great example using acrobats all the time about these two acrobats. And one of them is standing on the shoulders of the other. And one says, all right, I'll watch out for your balance and you watch out for my balance so that we don't fall over. And the other acrobat says, that's never going to work. You have to watch out for your balance and I have to watch out for my balance. That's how we don't fall over. We can't control other people's balance. We can only work on our own. That doesn't mean we don't care about other people, but we cannot balance other people for them. We need to make sure we're balanced ourselves. And if we're balanced ourselves, that's what's going to do more good for other people, because then we're not as likely to crash into them. And even if they may still crash into us, well, we're balanced now. So we have a stronger foundation to withstand that collision without getting knocked over ourselves. Interesting question here, Farnes. Do we dismiss all decisions while in state of anxiousness? Will nothing be coming from our intuition? We may have to make decisions while anxious, right? To come back to what mindfulness is for a moment, we're talking about developing clear seeing. The clear seeing of where we're getting in our own way. Like thinking that the cloud of anxiety is solid. fixed is exactly the way our worst fears tell us it's going to be. Is an anxious mind the best place to make decisions from? Not necessarily. Are there going to be times when we don't have a choice and have to make decisions while anxious? Yeah, probably. So that's why it's important to practice clear seeing. Like approaching that cloud to get to know what it's really like, and is it really that solid? So when those times do come up, anxious or not, when we have to make decisions, we're doing so based on the clearest seeing possible that we have available to us in that moment. And the more that we practice, the better we'll do. We can't do better than our best. So we just keep working to improve. From Ron, what do you think about the concept that the body remembers? I heard the other day, there's a great book out there called The Body Keeps the Score, you might have heard of. I read that one a while ago. It's really interesting stuff. As some of you know, I've been practicing yoga for a number of years, and this has never happened to me, but I have heard stories from people who, on the yoga mat, will get into a certain pose at just the right time and suddenly burst into tears. They accessed or opened up some particular body part where something was stored, perhaps. Some memory that needed to be released. In the Western society, we tend to think of the body and the mind as being two separate things. Are they really? All part of one system, isn't it? So, thoughts, particularly what we think of as emotions, it's a thought with a felt sense. So yeah, when we experience certain things, mentally, emotionally, there's a physical reaction there, and vice versa. That's how we end up in some of these vicious mind-body cycles. It's effectively what a panic attack is. And one of the big leaps in my practice was when I started coming to the felt sense of things. Because me being very left-brain, logical, intellectual type who came to the practice because of an anxiety issue, I naturally focused very heavily on things above the jawline. And when I started working with a teacher who said, you have a body below the jawline too. Want to check that out? Quantum leap in my practice. The mind likes to think it's running the show. But the body has wisdom that the mind doesn't have a clue about, in my experience. Now, there's a question if I'm talking about muscle memory, and this is from a few minutes ago, so I'm not sure if that's which part of what I was talking about is in relation to that. But a lot of this stuff is like muscle memory. Even the mental stuff, like what I was talking about a few minutes ago with, we're establishing clear seeing as often as possible, such that when we may be in a difficult emotional state, experiencing anxiety or some such, but then we have to make a decision. Well, we've been practicing so much that it becomes automatic that we have a level of clarity even within the anxiety. It's not like I don't feel anxiety anymore. I still feel anxiety. But I have a level of clarity within it. For example, we were talking a few minutes ago about that feeling of being inside the cloud. And sure, that was very disconcerting at first, but I've been inside that cloud enough times to know now that even if I can't see the outside from it, it's there. I'm in the middle of some vapor. I can't see okay. So here I am again, inside the cloud. Okay. Uncomfortable. Okay. So? I've been uncomfortable before. I've been in this cloud before. This is that familiarity I'm talking about. There's not so much uncertainty around it. So it may be uncomfortable, but I'm not making things worse. I'm not causing suffering. And that's, it's like muscle memory. It just comes automatically because that's the habit we've built. Again, cause and effect. I've been setting these causes and conditions for so long. Here's the effect. Did it get rid of all my discomfort? No. Is it a better situation than I was before? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take the discomfort without the suffering, if that's the option, rather than the discomfort and the suffering. Yeah, I'll take that deal. I'll take that. Michelle, can it be dangerous to be lost in the cloud and not be able to see the danger on the other side? Is there danger on the other side? I mean, didn't you start out outside the cloud? And now you're inside the cloud. Was there danger on the outside when you came in? Is there danger on the outside after you've gone in? I don't know. It's not that we don't prepare for things that could be risky, where there could be danger. But at what point are we assuming that there is danger without any good reason or evidence of that? What do we even mean by danger? You might want to explore that a little bit. What kind of danger are you anticipating? Are you expecting? That distinction between being uncomfortable and being unsafe. Two very different things. Is there danger on the outside of the cloud? Is it actually unsafe? Because again, remember, the cloud itself is just vapor. There is no real other side of the cloud. I mean, this is a mental construct, that there's an other side to the cloud. There's an other side to something you can just walk right through. Even if you can't see through it, you can still just walk right through it. So what's the other side? Right? See the assumptions that come up. There's this assumption not only that there's going to be danger, there's an assumption that there's an other side. What's the other side? We're only ever here. We're never on the other side. What is the other side? See, all these interesting assumptions about the way we conceive of things. And that's what we want to start poking at. Is like, well, wait a minute, is this conception any more accurate or real than a cloud? Or is this just more vapor? Is this just a way of looking at the world that I'm using as a way to try to make sense of it, to be less bewildered or confused by it? But I'm confusing my way of looking at the world as being the way the world actually is. Because one quick look at something under a microscope will tell you we do not see the world as it actually is. We simply don't have the sense organs for that. Right? From Karen, do you have a session that helps with addressing fears and anxiety with loved ones? I don't know that I have something specifically for that. What I offer tend to be general techniques that, in my experience, ultimately apply to all kinds of different scenarios. Because in my experience, most or all of the ways that we are getting in our own way, however they might be coming, whether it's in relationships to other people or something that we want out in the world or what have you, they all tend to filter down to the same root place, which is some kind of fear, anxiety. Even when we're talking about things like regret, you go down deep enough, and these things almost inevitably intermingle with, if not entirely grow out of, some kind of fear. So if you have a particular situation that you want to ask about more specifically, feel free to drop me a line. But in my experience, this is really universal stuff, which is why the Buddha's teachings from 2,500 years ago and a culture widely different from my own, these teachings still apply as much as they ever have. I'm going to wrap it up there. We went way over today. As you can tell, I really enjoy hearing from you folks and could end up sitting here all day, but unfortunately the schedule will not allow that. So I hope everyone does well today. Keep in mind what we talked about and see how it works out. Thank you all so much, everyone. Cheers.